As we're facing a troubled world and building a new one as we go, holding each other stronger together, standing as a people so bold.
I am here with Tam Martin Fowles, who, among other things, is the woman behind Mad Woman Talking. And I will leave it to her to introduce herself properly and let us know exactly what she's currently doing.
Okay, lovely to be here and doing this with you, Anne. So Mad Woman Talking is kind of a spin-off of many things that I've been doing throughout my life. And it's also kind of an affirmation of the positives that have come from my journey through mental health distress and crisis. To a place where I still consider myself to be psychologically divergent, and embracing the word mad, which was once absolutely drenched with shame and fear, is quite a celebratory thing. So that's why I decided to put that in the title. Although some people are really uncomfortable with it, especially psychiatrists, I've discovered. Yeah, so where shall I start? I guess I'll start with what I've already mentioned, the fact that that I had severe mental health issues when I was younger. So I had quite a traumatic childhood. And I was about 29 when I completely broke down. So my mental health wasn't great up until then, but I was kind of limping on. I had 2 children and a good job. And then I had a massive breakdown very suddenly when I was 29. I was diagnosed with psychosis, which continued for some time. I wasn't able to look after my children. I kind of lost everything, really. Everything crumbled. The rug was pulled out. I didn't know who I was, where I was, what I was. Couldn't live in consensus reality. I thought I was invisible. I hallucinated. I heard voices. At the same time, there was an incredible beauty to what I was experiencing. So the colours were different, were vibrant and stunning. There was an awareness, a spiritual awareness that I'd never experienced before and haven't since. So I would say that probably 98% of that experience was terrifying and awful, but the 2% was so glorious and amazing and beautiful that I'm still really grieving the loss of that, because nothing else has ever come close. So since that happened, I spent many years just trying to claw my way back to being able to live in the same reality as other people and look after my children and make a living. And it was all very challenging for a long time. I went to a really brilliant therapeutic community, which was NHS run, long decommissioned, as most of those places are, but it was absolutely amazing. It was a bit like being brought up all over again in an environment where the boundaries were really, really strict, but there was so much love. So I was very, very fortunate to be able to go there. And through going there, I learned how to be in the world again, gradually, at least to some extent. And I moved to Cornwall from South Oxfordshire. I grew up in South Oxfordshire. I actually first went to Cornwall during the time that I was experiencing altered states with the intention of jumping off a cliff. And obviously I didn't jump off a cliff. I had a very profound sense of connection with the nature down there, and just of oneness with everything, real spiritual awakening. And subsequently, actually about 2 years later, having come back, gone to the therapeutic community, recovered sufficiently to get my children back, I moved to West Cornwall and lived there for 24 years. Yeah, it was a struggle, but it was a struggle in a place that was safe, and that it was a place that a lot of people run away to. So I definitely ran away. I was hiding down there, and that's what I needed for a really long time, and very much communing with the elements, the sea, the landscape. I made some really great friends there, lots of artists and therapists. In West Cornwall, I found an excellent therapist who was a transpersonal therapist, and I didn't know that was a thing before I met her. But the transpersonal psychology that I learned about gave me a framework for what had happened to me. So transpersonal therapy is all about the realms that you can't perceive with your five senses. So there's a lot of Jungian stuff in there. There's dream work, there's art therapy, symbolism, myth. It was absolutely my language. It was like coming home to something that I hadn't known that I'd been missing. So then I trained to be a transpersonal therapist myself. I trained to be a transpersonal counselor, and then later on a transpersonal hypnotherapist, more really as my own personal journey as part of my recovery. But I did work in private practice when I needed to, and found it to be a really profound way of working with other people as well as myself, because I was doing my own therapy all the time. I mentioned that I used to hear voices, and when I discovered transpersonal therapy, I learned about the different parts of myself, the subpersonalities, the archetypal parts, and I recognized some of the voices that had been, I mean, they used to be very abusive, very, very frightening, telling me it was time for me to die, contributing lots of really imaginative ways that I could make that happen. And there was no way of shutting them out. But they did subside. There were a few stragglers after the majority subsided. But when I started learning about transpersonal psychology and particularly subpersonalities, I kind of got to know the parts of me that had projected the voices, and I learned to befriend them. So I drew them and I dialogued with them in journals and gave them names and learned to mediate between them. So that's something that I still do, actually. I mean, I'm not sure whether I'm still a voice hearer. I said for a long time that I wasn't, because I preferred the term subpersonalities. But I still sometimes hear voices, but it's okay. One told me I was a lazy cow when I was thinking about getting a taxi in a queue in Primark the other day, and it's fine. But this kind of therapy was an absolute salvation for me in learning how to do that, and in just deepening my understanding of what goes on in my psyche into something that is fascinating and provides opportunities for endless growth and personal development and creativity. It's made me very creative.
How did this type of recovery affect your relationship with your children and other family members?
It was really tricky. I did not bring up my children well. I wasn't sufficiently recovered that I had really had the bandwidth. I don't think I was grown up enough. I wasn't adult enough to be able to parent my children well, particularly the oldest two. I had a third considerably later, and I think I was a better mother to her. But I would say probably the greatest sorrow of my life is that I was not able to be the mother that I always thought I would be. When I had my daughter, my oldest child, I just thought, this is what I was put on the earth for, and I am going to be the best mother there ever was, and I'm going to make sure that nothing on earth ever hurts this child. And then 4 years later, it was me that hurt the child. Obviously, I didn't have any control over that. I couldn't help it, but that's been very difficult to live with, and it's still very difficult to live with. So I really struggled with being a mother, really struggled, particularly with my first two children, because I felt that I damaged them so much, and the guilt and the shame were so huge that it made it really difficult to move forward. And I think I would have been a much better mother, actually, if I'd been able to put down the guilt and the shame, because they didn't help anybody. But yeah, that's been a really, really long journey, and they're still there. There's still, I still struggle with those emotions, but I have a lot more compassion for myself now. My children are very forgiving. They're wonderful adults. They have all become really remarkable adults, and now I have 2 grandchildren, and that's a joy, because I get to do all the loving and playing and caring without having to take the responsibility and without all that baggage. Also, the whole experience, my mother looked after my children while I wasn't able to, and she was 60 at the time, and she was a fantastic grandmother, but that really wasn't what she'd signed up for. And I think it was an incredible thing for her to do, and at the time I wasn't grateful. I had a lot of issues with my mother, and I didn't like the fact that she was bringing up my children because of those issues. And she died about 12 years ago. And I'm really sad that I didn't fully appreciate what she'd done for all of us in time to express that to her. And yeah, I mean, our relationship was very much shattered by what happened to me. Now, interestingly, actually, all this stuff, me setting up Mad Woman Talking, I'm writing a book now. I'm doing a lot of work training. I train psychiatrists and clinical psychology students, and I'm doing work around restorative justice, so addressing harm that has been committed through psychiatry. But all of that stuff really came from a one-day training that I did right at the end of the first lockdown in open dialogue, which is a form of psychiatric or treatment, or treatment for people with a psychosis diagnosis specifically, which was pioneered in Finland, Lapland, and has amazing positive effects on the people who go through it. It's been trialed. The trials have just finished in the UK, in 4 different parts of the UK, and those have been very successful as well. But when I first learned about it, and I learned that open dialogue works with people, come in, very skilled practitioners come in and work with the whole family, all the significant people in the life of the person who's experiencing the crisis. The person who's experiencing the crisis is the center of everything. Their needs, their opinions, their thoughts are paramount. They get to say what they think they need, with the people that they love and that they want to be involved, who know them well, all getting to contribute to that as well. There are never any meetings by anybody. Nobody talks about them behind their backs. So staff don't go away and have a meeting about this person. The person is always in the meeting. And when I learned about that, it was 30 years since my crisis, and something opened in me. And when that something opened, there was a lot of rage and a lot of grief about what happened to me when I was absolutely in crisis. I had very, very negative experiences with a particular psychiatrist, actually, but with mental health services in general, until I went to the therapeutic community. And that's what led me to go to Cornwall with the intention of taking my own life, because I was just not getting any support, and it wasn't tolerable. And it was like everybody was saying that I needed to get well, get back to normal. And I knew that wasn't the case. I knew it wouldn't be. There was no normal for me to get back to. I'd never been normal. I'd always been a bit of an outsider. I'd never felt I fitted in. I'd never been happy. But all the people who loved me were saying, we just want you to get back to normal. And the psychiatric profession was saying, take these medicines and go to hospital, and we just need you to get well. And I knew that those things wouldn't make me get well, but nobody would listen to me. And I absolutely knew what I needed, and nobody thought that I had anything worth saying, and nobody would listen to me. And they just talked about this awful thing called psychosis, which just needed to be got rid of. Let's bombard that with horrible toxic medication, which has the most appalling side effects and withdrawal symptoms, and let's get rid of it. So nobody was interested in what was actually happening. And although it was terrifying beyond words, there was so much meaning. And if there'd only been people who could have come in and said, it's okay, you're safe, we're here with you, what's happening, what do you think that might be about? I think that would have made so much difference, all the difference in the world. And that's the kind of thing that happens with open dialogue. So when I learned about this thing 30 years on, suddenly this door that I had shut on my experience, because that's what I had to do in order even to go to the therapeutic community, I had to be in touch with reality. And I still object to the fact that people refer to reality as if it's one thing, because my experience tells me absolutely unequivocally that there are many realities. Yeah, I was just told I was out of touch with reality. Take this medication. I refused to take the medication because I was very aware of a tiny, tiny light in the darkest depths of me that was flickering, but only barely. And I knew that if I took medication, that would go out. And that was all that remained of me, the essence of me. And nobody wanted to hear that. So, so I refused to take the medication. And I was told that I didn't want to be helped. There was nothing else. I went to Cornwall, didn't jump off the cliff. I spent 2 weeks in Cornwall on the edges of the cliffs at Land's End, having this really remarkable, beyond words experience of being one with the landscape. And then I came back, and I knew about the therapeutic community. I knew someone who went there. So I went back to see this psychiatrist who'd said I didn't want to be helped, and told him what had happened in Cornwall, thinking that he would recognize that something really significant had happened. And I asked him to refer me to the therapeutic community, and he refused. He said, "You're too out of touch with reality again." And again, he said, "All I can offer you is medication. I can admit you to the hospital. You can go to occupational therapy. You can do craft things there. You can recover in your own time." And I said no. So he washed his hands of me, and I went away. I went to stay with a very close friend, actually, who had 2 children the same ages as mine. And I found it so unbearable being around her children when I couldn't be with my children, that I just couldn't stand the pain anymore. So this was about 3 days after I'd had that appointment with him. I decided I was going to admit myself. I thought, I'll go back. Okay, he can admit me. He can give me drugs. I will welcome the oblivion, because I can't stand this any longer. So I went back. I got the train back to the hospital. It was a Saturday morning, and I went in sobbing and went to reception and said I wanted to see this psychiatrist. And because it was a Saturday, he wasn't on duty. So they said that they would fetch the duty psychiatrist for me. And she was a young South Asian woman who came up to me and took my hand and held it in both of hers and looked into my eyes and offered me a cup of tea. And we went into a room, and she brought a cup of tea and a plate of biscuits, and we sat down, and she just asked me to tell her why I was there. And I said, "I want you to admit me." So she said, "Well, just tell me what's going on. Tell me your story." So I did, and I was distraught. I was sobbing, and she just sat and listened, and she wasn't afraid of my pain, which is such an important thing. She just let me cry, and she let me talk, and she listened, and she prompted a little bit, but she didn't jump in, she didn't interrupt, she didn't pathologize. She just listened. And then when I'd finished talking, she said, "I'm not going to admit you to this hospital because I don't think you're mentally ill." She said, "You have a lot of social problems. You have experienced trauma." First time I'd heard of trauma in that context. But I think if I admitted you here today, you could become mentally ill very easily, and it might be difficult for you to get out again. And also, I told her about the tiny light, the flickering light, and she said, I'm not going to give you medication. I want you to fan that flame, and I want it to grow. And it was funny because I was gobsmacked that this psychiatrist was listening to me and speaking to me like a human being, and understood about the light. But also I'd psyched myself up now. I'd spent all this time fighting to not have medication and not go to hospital, and now I'd psyched myself up to go, and I was quite disappointed. I was a bit indignant, really. But she said, you'd be better off going to a women's shelter than being admitted here. And I said to her, Dr. Taylor thinks I should be admitted. And she said, Dr. Taylor's wrong. And I was so impressed. He was her boss. She could have got into trouble for that, but she had the integrity to say that. And I probably spent an hour with that woman, and she completely turned my life around. And she didn't do anything that any kind of compassionate human being couldn't do. She was a psychiatrist, so she had power. To me, it was deeply significant that a psychiatrist had told me I wasn't mentally ill, and I never saw her again. And I've actually tried to find her because I want her to know that on the strength of an hour, she made such a difference in my life. And I've never managed to find her, but I tell psychiatrists, when I train psychiatrists, I tell them that story, because they need to know, they need to unlearn all this stuff, all the pathologizing stuff that they spout. And I'm aware, I know some lovely psychiatrists, and I'm aware that they are working in a system that's impossible if you are a compassionate human being. I really, really admire the psychiatrists who manage to remain human and compassionate given what they have to deal with.
I imagine in the 30 years since you were in the system, as it were, that things have just gotten worse. And you don't have these programs like the one that you were in. Absolutely.
I mean, there are things that have improved, like open dialogue, but now that it's been trialed in the UK, it remains to be seen whether it will actually be taken forward, even though that you absolutely can't argue with the results of the trials. Yeah, when I found out about open dialogue and this thing opened in me and all this rage and grief came out and something really changed. I think it's wonderful. It woke something up in me. It's a bit compulsive, this need to challenge the system. I was already challenging the system. I was already working in a way where I was offering training. I was using my lived experience. I was working a lot with people who have lived experience of their own in an inspiring kind of empowering them to have a voice way. But I guess I'm angrier now than I was before, because I can still see this happening. I can still see psychiatry and the system diminishing people, minimizing people, telling them they don't want to be helped if they don't do exactly what they're supposed to, pathologizing them constantly, labeling them, putting them in boxes. And it's so destructive. I mean, it's an atrocity, really. So Mad Woman Talking is very much about me using my voice. As well as Mad Woman Talking, I run an organization called Hope in the Heart, which is a social enterprise, and I work with a lovely young woman called Sophie. And Sophie and I were talking one day about this cathartic experience I'd had with the poem. And I said, there must be other people out there who would benefit from doing something creative, who are carrying this stuff around that they really need to express. I said, what if we did some workshops where we invited people to express what they need to say to people in power through creativity? And then Sophie said, that would be great. Maybe we could do an exhibition. So we decided that we'd give that a go, and we started running workshops. We put feelers out to see if people were interested, and they were really interested. We were already running creative workshops, but people started coming along to these creative workshops, and we always try to create a space where people feel safe and welcome, and we encourage them to share their stories. And we have a strong focus on compassionate listening. So we do a lot of stuff around really receiving each other's stories and honouring them, because too often, almost always, actually, people who've been through the system, whether that's homelessness, whether they're refugees and asylum seekers who've been through the Home Office system, through the psychiatric system, through social services, whatever the system, people are expected to trot out their most painful experiences to strangers who very often don't even make eye contact, who are looking at a piece of paper, ticking boxes, who they probably never see again, and then they have to trot it out all over again to another stranger, and it's re-traumatizing. That people are being constantly re-traumatized. So we try to create an environment where there is a safe, empathic space for people to share their stories and for their stories to be honoured. So we set that up. And then now, we've been doing these workshops for ages now because they've been very successful. We invite people, once they're feeling safe and they're part of our community, to think about the people in power in their lives, particularly service providers, and what they would like to say. And sometimes they have something like I did that they're carrying, which is for a specific person who they feel has harmed them. Sometimes it's a service in particular, sometimes it's society, local politicians, sometimes all of those. And then we encourage them to create a piece of art, and then we put on our first exhibition about 18 months ago in Plymouth, and it was absolutely incredible, the talent. And we have people who have never done art before, and because they're doing something that is so much from the heart, and we call this project Messages from the Heart, something happens. There's some kind of, I don't know, something magical happens, and they create these incredible, impactful pieces. It might be a piece of visual art, it might be poetry, sometimes music or dance. And so, yeah, and now that we've really got into the swing of this, we put on exhibitions fairly regularly, and also performance events where people can perform what they've been doing. And we invite anybody to come along, the public, but with a specific invitation for the people in power that we're looking to engage, who need to hear these messages. And it doesn't have to be the specific psychiatrist or social worker or Home Office official who did the harm. For many people, including me, actually, it can be really healing just for someone who represents psychiatry or social services or the Home Office to say, it's terrible that happened to you. That shouldn't have happened. I'm really sorry.
That was Tam Martin Fowles, founder of Hope in the Heart and creator of Mad Woman Talking. You have been listening to People So Bold, the UK Unitarian Social Action Podcast, a production of the General Assembly of Unitarian and Free Christian Churches. If you would like more information about the topics explored in this podcast, please refer to the People So Bold newsletter. You can sign up for this newsletter by sending an email to ahowell@unitarian.org.uk.
Standing as people so bold, walking into the unknown. Whatever will come, we know we're ready for the changes. It's darkest before the dawn.